Hello and welcome to our weekly live broadcast where we drink some tea together and talk about tea and life and anything you guys want to talk about. You can leave questions in the app. We have a section for these broadcasts. So if you're a Global Tea App member, go there and leave some questions. If you're not a Global Tea App member, sign up for Global Tea App. What are you doing? And we'll answer those questions first. And then, of course, you can ask questions here as well as we go along. But we're going to start just sharing some tea together. It's nice in this age of separation and isolation for many of us due to the pandemic to be able to still share tea through technology, through cameras, to be in the same space at the same time, virtually at least, and share some tea together. I hope you're safe. I hope you're healthy and happy and that you have some good tea to drink as we share a little bit of time and space together. So, like every week, we're going to start with 20, 30 minutes, drink some cups of tea, some bowls of tea if you're drinking bowl tea, and just enjoy. Well, that was wonderful. I hope your tea is wonderful as well. Before we start our discussion today, I have a very special announcement that I'm excited about, very excited about. It's been in the works for a long time, excuse me. So as some of you know, I'm an artist, a painter, and I'm not highly skilled or highly trained. In fact, I think my art can sometimes verge on childishness. It's got a kind of childish air, so it's not anything highly skilled, but I certainly love doing it, certainly enjoy it, and I film all of my art with tea spirit. So I always drink tea before I paint and try to kind of channel what I feel into the paintings and let the tea express itself instead of me. And I also literally grind my ink in tea liquor. So my paintings are also filled with literal physical tea. Sometimes I even literally pour tea all over the paper as well. And we've been working on this a lot. My special shout out and thanks to Connor, who worked so hard. But anyway, today we are launching a website for my artwork. It is there right now. It's called Tea Dyed Art. So TEADYED art.com. We'll put the link in the description of the video and in the comments. So you can go check it out, and there's scrolls and also paintings that you can purchase, and also you can commission artwork. So if you have something special in mind, or you want a scroll that's mounted on a particular color of silk or something like that, you can commission artwork there, and you can learn more about my painting process and about the way that I make art. And it's my aim to try to keep these paintings affordable. I want them to hang where people drink tea and inspire people to drink tea. Maybe if you have a painting that literally is imbued with tea liquor and also spiritually imbued with the heart of tea, and you hang that on your wall where you drink tea and you walk by it, it'll remind you more often to put a kettle on and sit down and drink some tea. So that's my goal, is that tea spirit can be where people drink tea. If you do commission a piece of artwork, something cool that it mentions on the website, but I just want to highlight it, something cool that I'm offering is if you do commission a piece of artwork and you want me to mix in a particular Light Meets Life tea, I'm happy to do that. As long as it's one of the Light Meets Life teas, because then we can be sure that we have it and it's available. So like maybe you really love the High Road, which I'm drinking now, which is top 10 teas in my whole life. I absolutely love it. So we'd be on the same page, you and I. And you're like, I want High Road in my painting, so I could do that. I could mix High Road with the ink and with the colors and with the painting. So maybe one of your favorite teas would be in your painting. So this is a cool little thing we're offering. And in the descriptions of the paintings that are already there for sale, it tells what kind of tea was mixed in or poured on them or whatever. So teadyedart.com, I'm really very excited about it. The website's beautiful, thanks to Connor, and really super stoked to be able to share my art with you, even though it's not terribly skilled or advanced, or I wouldn't compare it to some of the great artists out there producing things like professionally, but in fact, as I said, it's childish, but it's done with joy and with tea spirit, and so I love doing it and love sharing it as well. So it's exciting for me to be able to have this website and check it out, get a painting or commission one. So I hope you're excited about that, as I am. This week, I kind of wanted to address two things before we move into questions. first thing is kind of a little bit of a message for beginners to tea about like the barrier to entry. But we're actually going to get to that second. The main topic I want to talk about is, so the last few weeks, as you've noticed, we've been talking a little bit less about tea and a little bit more about like life wisdom or spirituality or whatever you want to call it, cultivation, the Tao. And some of that focus only on those topics was intentional. As I've said in the past few weeks, during this pandemic and lockdown, it felt like it would have been a little bit inappropriate to talk about like geeky things. I feel like that's lifting. If you want to ask geeky tea questions now, go ahead, shoot. But it felt a little bit inappropriate. So it felt like we had this opportunity through this lockdown and through the collective adversity that we were all facing to confront and contemplate some deeper aspects of the human experience and life. And that's a big part of tea, actually, which we're not going to talk about this week, but maybe if you bring that question back up next week, I'd be happy to answer that, what the relationship is. But throughout this discussion over these last few weeks of this life wisdom, a few times it's popped up in the comments, like, what's this, how did you learn this from tea, or what's this to do with tea? And I thought it'd be worth addressing that a little bit. I think especially because something that can happen, I don't know how much or little this applies to any of you, but in the West for so many decades, if not centuries, tea has been more approached as beverage, social lubricant, that kind of vibe, that it can be sometimes a little bit surprising for a Western person to learn how much depth and culture and meaning and spirituality and historicity tea has in China and in fact in the whole Far East. So it's worth pointing out that some of the things that, like, even small details that nowadays may appear a little bit more weird are actually very ancient and powerful trends in the lineages of tea. A small example, sometimes people come to our website and they're a little bit surprised that we name all the teas, because a lot of websites don't. They just have a cake of puer and they'll just put the description is 2009 Ailao Mountain, right? And they just list the date it was made, maybe Shangpuer, and the mountain where it comes from. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you go to 9 websites that do that, and then you land on ours, and it's the only one that's calling that tea Mountain Gate, you might wonder, why the poetry, right? But actually, this tradition of naming teas poetically is ancient. And it was all the hurrah throughout all the Tang, Song, Ming dynasties. It would have been weird to have a tea not have some kind of poetic name during those days, right? So that's just one small example, but it's not really what I want to dive into today. I want to talk about, just briefly introduce kind of the 2 aspects of tea practice. Tea more as cultivation. If tea is hobby to you or beverage to you, absolutely nothing wrong with that. And it's not beverage, hobby, or spiritual cultivation. Let's erase that or and write and. It's both. It's very much a beverage to me sometimes. It's very much a hobby sometimes. I'm uber geeked out on teapots, on history, on all of it. I love it. I love it as a hobby. And I can relate to people who drink it as a hobby too. And I don't demand that they drink it spiritually. They can continue to drink it as a hobby, and we still have so much in common. I do that as well. So I don't think it's one or the other. And if you drink tea in that way, there's nothing wrong with it. The only thing I have to say to people who drink tea as a beverage or as a hobby is, let's together, you and I, translate our love for this plant, for this leaf, into a love for the forest, because how do you love the leaf without loving the forest? In other words, if tea is just a beverage or to you, then let's make it a healthy beverage that doesn't harm the earth or harm farmers. And if it's a hobby for you, same thing. Let's not let our hobbies impact the ecologies of this world. And together, let's make a much more concerted effort to translate our love of tea, no matter why we love it, as beverage, as hobby, as spiritual cultivation. No matter why we love it, let's together love it in a way that is wise enough to know that you can't love the leaf without loving the forest, and that the mountain is the tea. That's its terroir. And the climate is the tea. And the pollution or lack of pollution is the tea. And that if we want good healthy teas, good healthy beverages, good healthy hobby, good healthy spiritual cultivation, we all need to work together to improve the impact that agriculture in general and specifically tea has on the environment. But today I want to talk a little bit about, there's two aspects to tea ancient that relate to spiritual cultivation, and introduce it a little bit, because we've been just talking about spiritual principles the last few weeks, and the good question came up more than once, like, what does this have to do with tea? So I want to just unpack very briefly, introduce the two sides of this. The first side doesn't require any method. The first side is a very active principle throughout all Chinese lineages. So it's something that's very prevalent in Taoism, in Buddhism, Zen in particular, and Neo-Confucianism. In fact, I could very easily use the Neo-Confucian angle. Zhu called this Gewu. So it means natural investigation. Basically, it's a form of empiricism. It's a form of looking and listening. But it's based on the idea that we can learn all the wisdom that we need to learn. We can figure out all that we need to know about how to live by observing nature. That in understanding the patterns of nature, we can understand the moral patterns that humans should live by. And the Neo-Confucians would say that the ancient sages did that. They read the patterns of nature and then designed and wrote books about the ways that humans could live in harmony with that. So there's this idea of listening, learning from the patterns in nature. This is different than the empiricism of science, because the empiricism of science is observing with an angle, with a bias towards finding or reducing nature to the mechanistic laws that govern it. So learning to figure out how it works. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's obviously an amazing form of empiricism. But the empiricism I'm talking about is much more, organismistic, much more organic. The patterns is not an attempt to see the mechanical laws to how or why things work, but rather to observe the natural patterns in an organic way, if we could separate those two. And that organismistic way of approaching nature. And that starts with a need to separate natural patterns from human desire. And in order to do that, there has to be clarity and quietude. And tea provides that. In fact, the founder of Neo-Confucianism, Zhu literally prescribed that, going out in nature, drinking tea, sitting, watching, observing nature, and finding the patterns there in the self, in nature. In fact, on a kind of meta level, tea relaxes us. It does that to all of us. And so that's its pattern. You see? That's already one of those patterns. And so the idea though, and it's there in Zen, in Taoism, and in Buddhism is that we can learn from the mountains, from the rivers, from the sun, from the cyclical patterns, from the sequential patterns, from listening to our own heart, from listening to our own being, and the wisdom that is inside of our bodies, because our bodies contain billions of years of atomic evolution, starting from when these atoms were born in a star until now, and hundreds of millions of years of organic evolution as we evolved out of the plant kingdom into the animal kingdom, and mammalias, and then primates, and then humans. And all of that wisdom is inside of my body, my ancestral wisdom. My body is actually very wise. As I sit and talk to you now, it's doing billions of things on its own. It's regulating my heart, my liver, my kidneys, and then that's not even a cellular level. All kinds of things are happening, hormones. It's very wise. And there's a wisdom inherent in me. There's a wisdom in nature. And if I can observe it and be quiet, I can, first of all, distinguish between human desire and natural patterns. And I can learn to then harmonize with those natural patterns and create a way of life based on them, or in harmony with them, or in dance with them. So this idea that nature has all the wisdom that we need, right, is very powerful. It's why tea is also so powerful, because it's not something oracled by a person. There's no prophet in the lineage of tea. There's no teaching. It's a non-verbal teaching. And no matter how deep and powerful the teaching that a human gives, it will never be as powerful as the mountains. No matter how awesome the chant, even the Almighty Heart Sutra, it will never be as powerful as the chant of the light that has traveled billions of years to reach our eyes in the form of the stars every night. And all the wisdom humanity has ever written is paltry in comparison to all that surrounds us in the water and rain and sun and moon and stars and mountains. And so if you've had a chance to listen to Leonard Cohen's most recent album, posthumous album, the last song on the album is very beautiful. It says over and over in many different ways, like, don't listen to me, listen to the butterfly. And a lot of poetry like that. Don't listen to me, listen to the butterfly, listen to the waterfall, listen to the stars, listen to nature. All the answers you seek are inside you and in nature. And that aspect of tea doesn't require any method. It's one of those, as I said, one of the natural patterns of tea is that it slows us down, it relaxes us, it helps us to listen. Something I'm always saying, nature is always speaking, and tea helps us to hear what she has to say. So tea, its nature, its chemistry, if you will, facilitates this gowu, this meditative listening and learning, which is the source of wisdom. And because that's just inherent in the tea, the brewing method, the human part, it's all irrelevant. Anybody can do that. There doesn't need to be a method. You just drink tea and listen to yourself, to the world, etc. The second aspect of tea that's very important has to do with ritual. And this is fundamentally different. This is where method comes in, and why method is important. And ritual also is a very complicated topic. I'm just giving you brief introductions to these things just to answer that question that came up in our previous discussions. Ritual, li in Chinese, is fundamental, and it is based on the idea that the ceremonies, the rituals, that inherent in them, they contain virtues, power, and that the conducting of the ritual properly makes those virtues second nature in you. So it's a way of taking abstract truth and actualizing it so that it becomes livable, right? It's a way of living the myth, because the myth is just a truth or a story that's out there and big, and there's a way of actualizing it into the life of the people. So in conducting the ritual over and over and over again, those virtues become a part of you, oftentimes without you even knowing it. They become kind of second nature, and they empower you. And so they create integrity and harmony and virtue kind of unbeknownstly. And to me, that's a kind of magic. Not magic in the sense of like Harry Potter and something floats, but magic in the sense that creating a desired outcome without force, without coercion. And this is really obvious. If you've ever come to a tea ceremony that we've hosted, or someone maybe in your local area, it's one thing you realize about a tea ceremony is really quickly, everybody becomes civilized. Everybody becomes ordered. The moment it starts happening properly, whoop, everybody sits up, everybody's ordered, there's peace, there's harmony amongst every one of the participants. It creates order and harmony in a very powerful way. And as those things start to be incorporated into you, if you're doing the ceremony right, this is where method becomes very, very important. It's like a spell, I guess. It has to be done right to carry that kind of energy of virtue that has been handed down, and the ceremonies are done properly, and then there is a virtue that starts to steep into you through that ceremony. It starts to change who you are. And so these are the two sides of tea and the practice of Cha Dao and what it can do. I said I would relate this to beginners. One thing I want to make very clear though is that, sometimes, especially if you didn't grow up with a lot of rites or ceremonies or method, and you approach method, you might be intimidated or even put off, worse. But it's important to remember that there is no barrier to entry. Just because there is a method, a proper method, doesn't mean that method is a barrier to entry. In other words, you don't have to be great at yoga to go to yoga class. If that was the case, nobody would have ever started yoga class. You don't have to be a master dancer to start dance class. You can come and know nothing and be behind everybody and making a mistake at every turn. It's okay. You can be a year into your dance class and still not have figured it out all that well. That's okay. That's me. I'm a slow student. I'm that type. So there's a balance that needs to be achieved. That first aspect of tea, that gobu, that listening, anybody can do that with any method, with a bag of tea in a mug. I would hope it's organic. But with any method, any tea, that listening, that relaxation, that clarity that results from separating natural patterns from human desire, that is available to anyone immediately. But even the second part, the method, the ceremony, and the way that it's conducted is not a barrier to entry, right? I would hope that your dance teacher wouldn't throw you out even after you had been going 2 years and still hadn't gotten good. If that was the case, I wouldn't be sitting here, because I told you I'm a very slow student. And fortunately, I had patient teachers who were willing to put up with my very slow bumbling. So there is no barrier to entry unless you create it psychologically and feel like, oh, what they're doing. Look at that chashi. I don't have a cloth like that, or I don't have teaware like that. I couldn't do that, etc., etc. That's a mistake to do that. You don't have to show up knowing anything in order to take the class. And you don't have to be able to do it well to start doing it. There is no barrier to entry. But that's not an excuse to then go to the other extreme and say method doesn't matter. I don't care. Slap it all around. I don't want to learn. That's not the answer either. Like, the answer is not like, I don't want to learn, I'll just do it however I want. You've gone to the other extreme. There is a way, but you don't have to master it. Actually, there are ways. Our lineage is not the only tea lineage. There are other brewing methods. They're all viable. You can learn different approaches and different methods from other teachers as well, of course. And so, there are ways, not ways, but you choose one, and, within that context of that lineage, there is a way. And the goal is to learn it eventually and be able to do it so that it's second nature, really well. But being able to do that is not a barrier to starting. And it's certainly not a barrier to starting in terms of that gobu, in terms of that listening, right? What these two aspects of tea really are is listening and honoring. And these are the two kind of spiritual skills that are, to me, paramount above all else. So, on that level of listening, it doesn't matter how many years you've been practicing. You could be practicing, this could be your third day ever drinking tea, or you could have been drinking tea every day for the last 50 years. And in terms of that listening to nature through the practice of tea, that meditation basically is what we're talking, what that is. That's zazen, that listening, observing, that mind that, is available to everybody, no matter what method they're practicing. It's immediate, it's there, it's part of our nature and nature. That wisdom is all around us, and if we but listen, we will learn how to live skillfully through listening. Is the principle, including morality, including ethics, everything, every aspect of human life. We can integrate and harmonize with the world around us. So that's certainly not a barrier to entry. Because from that perspective, you could just go today with any teaware, a Hello Kitty teapot, a cracked bowl, and simple tea, and no method, and go sit in a bamboo grove and drink tea, and have, deep and powerful lessons, deep insights, deep wisdom. You could also do that in your house by going inward and learning from yourself too. And you could do it with a mug and a tea bag, and any of that is fine from that perspective. And then on the other side, within ceremony, certainly there are methods, and you choose a lineage, and that lineage will have its methods, and the methods are important, and there's a right way to do it. But being able to do it properly is not a barrier to starting. You don't have to be good at it to start, of course. And that goes for every ritual. It goes for every ritual. So, that's the lesson for today. I hope that helps a lot of you and brings a little bit of a small introduction to some of the historical answers, maybe, to the question of what does all the life wisdom we've been talking about the last few weeks have to do with tea? All right. So a lot of the life wisdom we've been talking about in the last few weeks that is either come through my own gobu, my own listening to nature, or others who came before me listening to nature and then teaching me what they heard. And then once somebody teaches you what they heard, the goal is not just is never to say, my teacher was listening to nature and learned this truth and then told it to me and now I follow it. No. The only point in the teacher telling us that they heard X from nature is so that we could then go out and verify that ourselves, in ourselves or in nature. We could listen and hear that same thing. Okay, so questions?
Amitabh from India is asking, does one need to have all the information before making an informed decision, or how much is enough?
An informed decision about what? I'm not sure I understand the question. Obviously, I guess the person's asking how much information one needs to make a decision. That really depends on the type of decision. But in any decision, more information is better than less. But I don't think that information is the total amount of what's needed to make healthy decisions. I don't think the totality lies in the domain of data. Certainly, information and good logic are helpful in decision making, extremely helpful. But there's also intuition. There's also internal navigation. There's also one's destiny map. By destiny, I don't mean the things that are fated to happen. I mean that force inside of us that nature endowed us with. Our dharma. Our Tao. So there's other aspects of decision making that are non-rational. Certainly. That's why we say, my gut tells me X. Right? There are all kinds of feelings. Essentially we have three types of feelings. And in the West, as we move down, we respect them less. We have less words for them. They're more ambiguous because we tend to be scientific and empirical. That's a good thing and a limiting thing. But But there are three types of feelings that all human beings have. There's feelings in terms of physical sensations, like itchy, heat, cold, pain, right? These are the ones we have the most words for and the ones that we regard as the most real. The next kind of feeling is more what we would call emotions. Emotions like sadness, frustration, anger, right? We have less words for that and we trust those less, right? But there's a third type of feeling, which is, for lack of a better word, a spiritual feeling that every human on earth has experiences of, and yet in the West we don't even ever hardly talk about these. I'll give you an example. At some point in your life, in the past or right now, you have lived with other human beings. So you live in a house with a family, and there's a family and they're all active in that house, and then one Tuesday at 5 p.m. you come home and nobody's there. Is there not an empty house feeling? Have you ever felt empty house feeling, Connor? Connor's felt empty house feeling. How about you, Janos?
Yes.
Janos has felt empty house feeling. And what is empty house feeling? It's not a physical sensation. It's not a emotion. It's something weird. The empty house feeling. I don't know what that is, right? I know there's just one last example, right? A feeling that somebody, like, I've traveled very extensively in my life, been to, almost 100 countries, and any traveler will have in their life had the experience of walking into a restaurant and the I don't eat here feeling. And I'm not talking about like I see something dirty. I'm not talking about there's no correlation between anything I'm sensing with my six senses. It's not like I smelled something funny or that it looks dirty in here. It's just a like gut feeling. Like this is not the restaurant I'm going to eat in today. You just know it and you go out. Anyone who's traveled, especially traveled in the time I traveled before, I've never in my life, believe it or not, owned a cell phone. But when I was traveling, they didn't exist. And so we didn't have like Googles and Yelps and things to tell us where to eat. So, you oftentimes when you're traveling, you show up in a city, you're going to go just like try some restaurants by walking in and you have that feeling, I'm not going to eat here feeling. So my point is that decision making happens on all kinds of levels. But to answer your question, how much information is necessary to make a decision? Obviously, the more information you have, the better decision you can make. Let's put it that way. But I can't really answer that because it totally depends on the decision. Some decisions have a time limit, so they have to be made quickly. And so the answer is still that the more information you have, the better equipped you are to make that decision. But you can't take too long to go out and find unlimited information in that case because there's a time limit. So you also have to use other forces.
Can you please explain more about the essence of nature in tea and how can we focus on this while drinking?
The essence of nature in tea. That's kind of what I was discussing, I think. Learning to listen. And the main area of listening is learning to distinguish natural patterns from human stuff. Tea certainly relaxes us, and because it has that pattern, it makes that listening easier. Which is what I mean when I say tea has the essence of nature. But actually, on an absolute level, all things have the essence of nature. These flowers have the essence of nature. This teapot has the essence of nature. Connor has the essence of nature. I just don't go around saying, hey, Connor has the essence of nature. I go around saying tea has the essence of nature. Why? I know this is a little subtle, but if you concentrate, you'll be able to follow what I'm saying because it's going to be hard for me to put this into words, but because tea's natural pattern is to relax us and make listening easier. And when we listen, we can find the essence of nature in all things. This is why the emphasis on tea containing the essence of nature. It's a bit like you can find wisdom in yourself, but really wisdom truly is understanding the connection between yourself and all things. In other words, realizing the oneness that is your Buddha nature. So through the self as the instrument, you connect to that which is connected to all. So it's not like tea contains the essence of nature and other things don't. That's silly. Tea is not any more or less nature. But because tea has the pattern of relaxing human beings, calming us down, slowing us down, which makes it easier to distinguish the human desires from the natural patterns and look at the nature and learn from its essence, that is why the emphasis on tea. I hope that makes sense. It's a little subtle, but I don't have any other better way of explaining it. Through the particular, we reach the universal, is basically what I'm saying. Through the relative, the absolute.
Well, the only other question we have is, could you please go into a bit more deeper into the listening topic?
Could I talk more about listening? I don't know what else to say. That's something that you have to engage in. It's as I said, even when teachings are handed down and the teacher says, I practiced Gobo, I listened to the mountains and I learned this thing, and now I'm going to tell you what I learned. Or they aren't even telling you what they learned, they're telling you what their teacher learned, or their teacher, or their teacher. Maybe it goes back 1,000 years. We say, like, in the Zen tradition, blah, 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 and there's this wisdom that eventually came from somebody's satori, somebody's listening, somebody's awakening. The aim of that is not for you to turn that into dogma. The first foundation of Zen is no doctrine, no dogma. So the aim is to guide your listening experience, not to give you the cliff notes so you don't have to go listen yourself. That's the modern approach to life hacks. I'll take thousands of years of spirituality and turn it into a life hack. Zen for dummies. And in 5 minutes of meditation with my handy app, I will achieve what decades of practice takes. That's not effective. It's not possible. They're not tricks, right? Because of what I just said. All that is like you could take somebody else's wisdom and you could turn it into a dogma. Something that you adhere to or follow because they said. But again, the Buddha gave us 2 qualifications for truth. 1, is it in concordance with the teachings of the wise? 2, is it in concordance with your own experience? It has to be both for it to be truth. So the point is, even if it starts as concordance with the teachings of the wise, you have to then fulfill that with your own experience for it to become real. So those teachings that are given and handed down aren't given with the intention of telling you how things are or telling you what to do. They are to guide your listening so that you can go out into nature or into your own heart mind and hear those same truths yourself. Because that is the only way that they will be effective, actual, real in your life. As dogma, they will just be clothes that you wear, and they will actually be limiting. This is why some wise men have said, right, religion often inhibits the religious experience, because when you put it on as dogma, it can even get in the way of actually having the experiential truth. So the aim of teachings, as I've been saying every week, always, I keep saying this over and over again, the aim of teachings is not to take a stance for me to tell you how reality is or tell you what to do. The aim of teachings, they are invitations to explore. You have to, even if many teachers over many hundreds of years have all verified that when you sit in meditation and listen to your own heart, you experience X. Just because even, let's say, 1,000 teachers over 5,000 years all report the same thing. When you meditate for X amount of years, you will experience X. Even if they all verify that, the point in telling me that is not so I can just then say, oh, well, if they all experience that, it must be true and go about my way. No. To be effective, I will have to then realize that myself. And so the benefit of that teaching, though, is that maybe if I listen to all those wise men, my experience can be a little bit more expedient. It won't take so long as it took them. In other words, I can get to that realization quicker through their help. But I still have to get there. Hopefully that makes sense. But listening is something that you have to do, not understand intellectually. Even with language. Ralph Waldo Emerson said something very beautiful. He said, "It took me 5 years to learn to speak the English language and 50 more to learn to hear it." So listening is hard. And I'm not talking just listening with ears to language. We're talking about a different kind of listening. We're using listening as a metaphor in the way that Guan Yin's name is "hear all cries." That's metaphoric. It's not with ears. It's listening. Listening is the most metaphorically powerful of the six senses. Because as a metaphor, it's the one that relates to meditation the most. That's why there were even literal meditations based on listening, because sound is the most powerful of the senses when it comes to meditation. Which it's where the relevance of music comes, into that so powerfully. And music is, amazing and a whole other topic of discussion.
Last geeky question. If one lives in Europe, which naturally has a drier climate, can one use a humidor for aging teas like puer?
So the question is, I live somewhere dry, can I age puer with a humidor, or sometimes humorously called pumidor? That's a very huge topic, super geeky, and we could talk about this for hours and hours. So traditionally, full maturity in puer tea is 70 years. That's not an arbitrary number. There's a reason for that. As puer tea ages, the influence of the age slows down. The aging process itself slows down, so that anyone can tell the difference between a 1 and a 5-year-old puer. Anyone can tell the difference between a 5 and a 10-year-old puer. But you have to really know puer to tell the difference between 10 and 15, and nobody can tell the difference between 15 and 20. You have to start jumping by decades, right? When you get to 70 years, the color of the liquor is not going to change anymore. It's black in the middle, brown, red, and then it has a golden ring. The physical color is not going to change. The tea will continue to change, but at that point, the cells of the cake are so broken down, or the tea are so broken down, that the next big noticeable jump will be after you're dead. So you have to go from like 70 to like 120 or something. It's the next generation, basically. And so 70 years was traditionally a good point. It is ultimately arbitrary, though. You can drink your tea after you've aged it 5 years, 10 years. Doesn't matter. It's up to you entirely when you drink it. But the only place to successfully mature tea to 70 years is Southeast Asia, right? Hong Kong, Taiwan, Malaysia. The discussion between those different storages is a whole other topic. And of course, Yunnan and Guangzhou as well in China. So this area is where tea has been stored successfully. What happens to tea that is stored long-term in anywhere else in the world is unknown. There's not enough of it to be able to say. But tea that's stored in dry climates is often very bad. It dies. It dies energetically, it dies in flavor and aroma, and we've done lots of experiments to demonstrate this personally. Just to give you an example of one, I once had a friend who lived somewhere in Russia, very dry, and he kept the same cake at the center, and he kept it at home, and after like 3-4 years, he came back and he was drinking them side by side, like competition style. And three of our friends happened to walk in the door as he was in the middle of that test, and he said like, "Hey, come over here and taste these two teas." He didn't even tell them anything. Just said, "Come over here and taste these two teas." And their reaction was all like, "Wow, that one's really good. That one's super yuck." And the yuck was the one that was stored too dry. Many other experiences of that as well. And there's a lot to talk about there in relationship to humidity and et cetera, and what puer needs. So there's also been experiments done. I've done 2, and I've read 3 or 4 in Chinese magazines where people use artificial storage of different kinds, and even test blind, and the artificial storage is always worse than the natural storage. Always. Which makes perfect sense to me. So, let's assume that, if I've done that experiment a couple of times, maybe you haven't. So, again, don't listen to YouTube videos. You have to have experiential truth. But let's just, for the sake of conversation, let's assume that that's accurate. Let's assume that natural storage is better than artificial storage in terms of a pumidor. That's not necessarily to say that, therefore, just because natural storage is better than artificial storage doesn't mean don't ever do that. And if you have to store tea at home, then a better question would be, is your artificial storage better than your natural storage? In other words, is your tea better off for having water in the cabinet or being in a refrigerator that's not on, or whatever you're using to increase the humidity? So that would be a test you would have to do. Do you see? So it might not be. So in other words, what I'm saying is that your tea stored at home might not, if you live in a dry place, it might not be, no matter whether you store it naturally or you put it in a pumidor and control the environment, neither of those will probably be as good as storing it in Southeast Asia. But maybe storing it in Southeast Asia is not an option for you. So the question is then just which of those 2 is better, which you'll have to test for yourself. My overall last thing that I'll say about this is that the answer to whether or not I would suggest doing that also has a lot to do with the amount of investment. We have to get real about this. If you're storing some cakes of tea for your own consumption, then like gung ho, have at it. Like, and hopefully, brother or sister, whoever asked this question, you share with us the results of your tests between natural storage in your dry environment and your pumidor, and maybe your pumidor is better, and maybe you do even not just those experiments, but more experiments in terms of different kinds of pumidors or adjustments to your pumidor, right? And you get it right, and you could share that with other people who live in dry climates and help them. So great, go for it and share the results. I highly doubt either of them will compare to natural storage in Southeast Asia, because you have to remember also there's a detail that I didn't speak about. As I said, this is super geeky and we could talk for hours, but in their natural environment, local microecologies, local microclimates, the critters basically are stronger in their home. So what that means is that the critters in your native place are most likely going to kill and take over the ones that were on the cake. And this is an area of science we haven't, in terms of fermentation in general and fermentation of puer specifically, we don't fully understand. Fermentation, and it's still, there's a lot of research left to be done, but the question is how much of puer's magic, or of puer, what age puer is, has to do with the leaf, and how much has to do with the particular strains of critters that are in the cake. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I will tell you that I have a friend who's a microbiologist, and we gave him some 50-year-old tea, and he found a bunch of amazing discoveries based on the microbes in it. And he actually grew me a culture of the microbes in it, and I drank it. So I was literally just drinking the microbes and not the leaves, not the infused liquor from the leaves. And it was extremely powerful. There was a tremendous amount of qi. So my personal view is that the microbes do play a role in what makes the medicine or the magic of puer tea, though I can't scientifically back that claim up. It's just my feeling. So but that aside, leave that aside, and let's just assume, that that's true. But if you have some cakes of tea and you want to age them for your own consumption, and you could then do those experiments and figure something out, and your Pomodoro might be better than just your ordinary shelf where you live because it's too dry, of course. However, if you're talking about large quantities of tea or expensive tea, then I would have to recommend against it. The analogy that I always use when I talk about this is like this. If you want to spend $100 on the stock market, then, I don't know, throw a dart at the newspaper. Use your gut. Do whatever you like. Buy stock in a company that you like. Maybe you use Apple computers, so you go spend that $100 on a little bit of Apple stock. That's, obviously. But if you're going to spend $10,000 on stocks, I would recommend consulting a stockbroker and assessing risk and doing a little bit more homework, right? So basically what I'm saying is this: if you're going to buy some cakes of tea and you're going to store them long term for your own consumption, then go play. If we're talking about jians, big boxes of really expensive puer tea that's $100 a cake, I would think more before I commit to any type of storage method or place or location. In that case, you might want to go with the sure bet and figure out a way to store your tea in Southeast Asia. In that case, even that's not a sure bet, of course. Tea could still get funked up here as well. Could get funky. There's plenty of ways it can get funky in Taiwan or Southeast Asia as well. So, not a guarantee. Just like even using a stockbroker is not a guarantee that you're going to lose the money or make money. It's just a better bet than randomly doing it yourself, basically. I hope that analogy helps you, and some of that gives you parameters to think about, and share with us your experience and what you do to hopefully improve your storage. If you live somewhere dry, conversely, the last thing I'm going to say is this: if you live somewhere dry, then you live somewhere that's much more conducive to storing oolong. Oolong doesn't like humidity, and aged oolong is incredible. And so, whereas we have the benefit of maybe storing puer more easily, we have a lot of difficulty storing oolong. We have to seal jars with wax and use all kinds of methods to do it, whereas you could store it pretty easily. And then, again, I don't know who asked this question. It's a brother or a sister, but brother or sister, tea friend, I'm happy to trade you later on. We can make some trades, you and I, later on in life. If you got some red oolongs, especially cliff teas, I'll be more than happy to trade you some of my aged puer for some of your aged cliff tea. Yeah. Good. Thank you guys so much. I really enjoyed these broadcasts and these discussions and the contemplations that ensue or that are elicited from these discussions, and how much I learn and sharing time and space with you guys. Once again, just like to remind you about my new art website. Go check it out and get yourself a painting. I'm really excited about it. And or commission one, send an email. But have a look, tell us what you think. If you have any suggestions for the website, let us know too. Thank you so much.